Great swords, long swords, and short swords. You'd probably think that these would be the weakest of the three. However, in Baldur's Gate 3, short swords are some of the strongest weapons in the game. So in this video, I'll be ranking them all on a tier list from best to worst. Now, the reason that short swords are so great is there's a lot of good ones with many different effects throughout all three acts. They're also light weapons and finesse weapons, so a lot of characters are able to wield them and wield two of them at a time. They also do a 1d6 of piercing damage at base. Piercing damage is better than slashing or bludgeoning damage in most cases, so this is great. However, the absolute best weapon in Baldur's Gate 3 is a short sword with Shadow Blade here, and it got even crazier with patch 8 that released earlier this year. So Shadow Blade at base does 2d8 of psychic damage. Now, that alone is great. Even if it was a 2d8 of piercing damage, that would make it one of actually probably the best short sword in the game. But psychic damage is better than piercing due to an item you can get in Act 2 called the Resonance Stone, which makes everyone nearby steeped in bliss, making the entity vulnerable to psychic damage. However, they have advantage on physical checks, but disadvantage on mental saving throws, so there is downsides to using this. However, getting double damage off of a 2d8 is crazy. However, new in patch 8, previously there was a ring that was only the level 2 version, we can now upcast this. If you use a level 3, it's a 3d8. If you lose a level 5 or 6 spell slot, it is a 4d8. And if you got mods that go past that, you can actually scale it even further. Now, there is no weapon in the game that does a 4d8 of damage, and that's counting physical damage. This is literally the best damage type in the game because of the Resonance Stone here. So 48 doing a maximum of 40 damage there just on a basic attack on my sorcerer here. That is also getting doubled. It's crazy. But the last part that makes Shadow Blade so crazy, they actually had to nerf this and fix it a little bit. The Shadow Blade tag on this weapon, you have advantage on attack rolls against lately or heavily obscured targets while using this blade. This used to work on any type of attack rolls, so your spell attack rolls, your ranged attack rolls. It's now only melee attacks, but it also works if you have an offhand weapon too. And they consider this to be lightly obscured. A lot of areas in the game are considered lightly obscured. If there's like a shadow on the ground, it can be the sunniest day in Faerun. All it needs is a little bit of a cloud there. You can see Gale, no advantage. Shadowheart, we got an advantage. So it's extremely generous. Now, I don't want to yap the whole video about Shadow Blade because it is so crazy powerful, but a few other things. Booming Blade also released. If you play as an Eldritch Knight and make your very first attack Booming Blade, you also can get a bonus action attack for 4 attacks per action and bonus action, which is absurd. Also, if you play as Gale, he gets a special level 3 spell slot, so the Eldritch Knight can get the 3d8 version of Shadow Blade. So Gale makes the best Eldritch Knight. Really weird. There's also things like Wrathful Smite giving a little bit of extra psychic damage, but they also release a new spell in patch 8 for the Hexblade, Staggering Smite, which adds an additional 46 of psychic damage. It's not going to be your best option, but it does add a lot of extra damage. If you need to just delete a target right then and there, you can likely do it with that spell. Now, honestly, this doesn't feel right to even have it on a tier list. It should be like 5 tiers higher than S tier. It's the best weapon in the game, but top of the S tier. Now, bringing things back down to earth, one of the first short swords you can find is the Short Sword of the First Blood. This is actually a really good weapon for a few reasons, because it's one of the first that you find, but it also comes with a conditional 1d8 of piercing damage if a target has full health. This is actually a pretty easy thing to trigger because every encounter you have, there's likely going to be full health enemies there, which you can just go around and proc the first attack on them, which will give you that extra 1d8 of damage. So this is just a good weapon because of how early on you can get it and how hard it is to find extra damage riders outside of like Hunter's Mark and Hex. So just good to have this. So there is a deep gnome that will be carrying this weapon when you make your way to the Myconid colony in Act 1. Now, another thing I want to mention is that Break the Unbroken only works to weapon attacks with this particular weapon. For some reason, a lot of short swords have abilities that will sometimes apply to the offhand weapon, or in some cases, the spell attack rolls that you'd make in the case of Shadow Blade. But this one here, it only works on this weapon attack. Honestly, I think this is a great weapon if you're going to be playing, like, if you have a rogue or a sword bard in your party, they're going to want to use this weapon. So I would say it's like, honestly, for how early on you get it, it's like a high A tier, I'd actually say weapon, just because it's pretty strong. You can actually beeline your way there because it's not really that hard to get. If you're playing stealthy in the Underdark, you can run and get it, like, literally within the first, like, 15 minutes of the game if you wanted to. But another really fun weapon that we have here is also a Shadow Blade-esque weapon. So there's 3 weapons in the game that have this Shadow Blade tag on them. This one here, the Knife of the Undermountain King, is honest about it. It says it has Shadow Blade. Another weapon, the Justiciar Scimitar, which you can get in Act 2, also has Shadow Blade, but it doesn't tell you that. It's kind of sneaky. That weapon also doesn't work properly in Honor Mode, and there's also another weapon on here that doesn't work properly on Honor Mode, but we'll get to that. The Knife of the Undermountain King, reduce the number you need to roll a crit while attacking by 1. This can stack with all the gear in the game, making this one of the best weapons throughout the entire game because of that. It's also a weapon enhancement +2 that you get in Act 1. This is one of my favorite weapons in the game too, because it comes with a unique weapon look here, and it looks really nice. So that's the appearance. That's kind of besides the fact, but it also has that Shadowblade advantage on attack rolls against lightly or heavily obscured targets. I showed during Shadowblade how generous that truly is. This is a really good weapon, light finesse and piercing damage, doing 1d6 plus 2 enhancement. Really good stuff here. I honestly would have to say this is a solid S tier as well. Not just the Shadowblade tag on it, but piercing damage, increased critical hit chance, re-rolling. Because when you roll the 2 or less damage, that's just really nice to be able to get a flat out increase to your damage because it does a 1d6. So this is great on really anybody. This is one of the weapons that you do need to grab in Act 1 just because you can use it throughout the entire game on anybody. I'll jump a bit ahead because I want to talk about the Sword of Life Stealing. This is another interesting weapon because you can get this in Act 2. Damon sells it here. This will, when you score a critical hit, the target will take an extra 10 necrotic damage if they're not constructs or undead. Notably, Act 2 has a lot of undead and things that are just resistant to necrotic damage, so that 10 damage will become 5 or in some cases 0, but you gain 10 temporary health points. This is a little bit interesting because that 10 temporary health points has a lower priority than other healing method or temporary health sources in the game. So if you have some other sources, will end up overriding that. So that's just something to keep in mind. However, it's a piercing damage weapon. It's a good one. Gets increased damage, plus 2 weapon enhancement. There's a lot to like about the Sword of Life Stealing. So yeah, even if you don't deal the necrotic damage, getting that temporary health is good. But it's just a powerful weapon that you get in Act 2. So I'd have to say this one, it's not as good as I would probably just throw it in the A tier. Compared to the other purple sword that we have in Baldur's Gate 3, there's only 2. Yeah, this one here and Knife of the Undermountain King. Knife of the Undermountain King's much better. I'd actually maybe even consider putting this one in the B tier. Yeah, I actually like that Act 1 weapon just because of how powerful it is for the early game where you really need that power. And this one comes into Act 2 where you already have the Knife of the Undermountain King. Yeah, I think that actually makes more sense here. And also in Act 2, we have the Assassin's Shortsword. So this is a plus 1 enhancement and an advantage on stealth checks. So that's really good. There's a few ways where you can also get advantage on stealth checks, like the Cat's Grace, which is an item you can get in Act 1. It's a chest robe, and you can put that on. There's also enhance ability. Like, there is other ways to get that, but hey, to just throw on a sword and be stealthy, that's nice. Now, if you want to go full out on stealth, greater invisibility, pass without a trace, this sword or some form of dexterity advantage, you'll be rolling. It's a fun sword, but yeah, I feel like you already have something that fills the same niche with the Cat's Grace. So if you really need advantage on, I'd actually recommend using the Cat's Grace. The Cat's Grace from the Graceful Cloth that's in Act 1. It gives a plus 2 to dexterity as well as advantage on all dex checks, so you can do sleight of hand. It's better than this, and obviously they're not the same. We're comparing a short sword to a clothing item that you can get in Act 1, but I think I need to take that into consideration because this is a sword you get in Act 2, so I might even say this one's like C tier because, yeah, I mean, it's not one you're going to be using too much. Also, does anyone see Scratch tripping out there? What's going on? Next up, we'll throw it back to Act 1, actually, with the Baneful. This is a really good weapon, because if you're playing as an Eldritch Knight or a Warlock, you're in luck. And with Patch 8, this weapon got another nice buff. So whenever you bound this weapon, it's going to have a +1 to damage and attack rolls. That's great. But the thing is, the Baneful Bond on hit possibly bane your target. This is really good because it's a DC 14 Charisma save. Enemies typically in Act 1 aren't going to have a great time with that, making it a really nice weapon. And the reason that is buffed in Patch 8 is because now the Hexblade Warlock, their Hex weapon will actually apply to this as well. And the great thing about that is it only requires a single level dip. If you're playing, let's say, a Paladin, and you wanted to use this weapon, you can, because you could do 5 levels of the Paladin, then take a single level of the Hexblade. And in Act 1, you can be rolling around with the Baneful and actually getting the full effects out of it. But Eldritch Knights are really good, and this is a powerful weapon until you get up to Shadowblade, and even then you can still roll with Shadowblade in this, because Shadowblade will buff your main hand weapon. So if you put Shadowblade in the offhand, these make for a really powerful Eldritch Knight in the early game. Really fun weapon, and I would actually say one of the most underrated weapons in Baldur's Gate 3. Bane being a condition that's annoying to apply typically, I think it's a little bit less annoying here because you're using it on a Warlock or an Eldritch Knight, which are already pretty powerful. And yeah, the Eldritch Knight doesn't get Shadowblade till a bit later, so this is actually a high, I want to say high A tier. I'm not going to throw in the S tier because I think there is a few other weapons that are just that much better. But this one, it's another Act 1 weapon that I really like. You can go and get these two right at the same time pretty much because you can purchase this weapon from Blurg and Ebon Lake Grotto. So yeah, they're pretty useful for how early on they are. That's kind of, again, back to my point about short swords being so powerful in Baldur's Gate 3. You know, what's cool is Act 2 actually has some pretty, like an evil sword and a good aligned sword. So you can get this one from Land the Slicing Short Sword, as well as the Sword of Clutching Umbra, but we'll get to that in a moment. With the slicing sword here, when you attack with advantage, the attack inflicts bleeding. There are many ways, like the risky ring, to get advantage on all your attacks. A barbarian can get advantage on their attacks. If you have a shadow blade in the offhand, you're likely getting advantage on your attacks. You see, there's a lot of ways to get this to proc bleed. Now, what's great about bleed is if you have a wild heart barbarian, I know this is not a very common subclass that people play, they have the aspect of the Wolverine, which if you attack a bleeding target, you can maim them, which reduces all their movement speed. There's actually a lot of really fun synergies here if you can get bleeding. There's also the Benediction of Bual, which will give you advantage on attacks against bleeding targets, which will just be just procs infinitely. And there's ways to cheese the Kuatoa benefits to get those advantage on attack rolls. So yeah, you can do some pretty silly stuff with this. I think it's a fun sword, and available in Act 2, pretty nice. But bleeding in and itself, you're not going to rely on it for damage, since combat in Baldur's Gate 3 is typically going to be a few turns at best, so that bleed damage isn't that good, unfortunately. But hey, it's still fun because it can proc a lot of other pieces of gear. I'd say it's probably a high B tier item, honestly, because the next sword we're going to talk about is a little crazier. So with the sword of Clutching Umbra, what this does is it's a stealth sword. Now, this is kind of a sneaky one. So basically what you want to do with it is you get this shadow-soaked blow. So this is actually also available on the Justiciar Scimitar. Strike an enemy, adding a proficiency bonus to the damage. Moreover, if the attack hits, it deals an additional 1d6 of psychic damage. That's cool. That's actually pretty nice. The last part is why it's so good. This attack does not break concealment. So you can go in and be very stealthy with this sword, and it basically will give you a second attack. Great if you wanted to assassinate a target, because, yeah, you get a freebie with this one. So if you want to be a little sneaky, you can go ahead here and attack with this, and you're going to stay relatively stealth. Yeah, normally attacking your teammates doesn't cause this to happen, but I think that's a little bit of a bug. But oddly enough, they're in combat, but I'm still, yeah, I'm not sure what's going on here. Oh, there we go. My game is seriously glitching out. I have no idea what is happening. But I think you get the idea. Shadow-soaked blow, it's strong. It keeps you in stealth, and it does break your concealment there, so you can use it on a lot of different characters to get an extra attack off. Pretty powerful stuff. I would have to say this sword overall is, it's honestly a good one. I'd put it in the A tier. It's one of those ones where you can use it to set up a specific build to do some pretty crazy stuff. And it's actually not even a specific build. There's a lot of ways you can use stealth now with this single weapon. So yeah, it's pretty good. You get it from Damon. Now next up, we got the Githyanki Shortsword. Now this one's also really good because when wielded by a Githyanki, this weapon deals additional 1d4 of psychic damage. What you can do is this only checks when you equip the weapon. So use Disguise Self, make yourself a Githyanki, equip this weapon, remove Disguise Self, you got that bonus damage, and it persists through long rest. So yeah, this is just a weapon you can consider that's got a permanent dip of one of the best damage types in the game. Githyanki longswords or short swords are really good. The Githyanki weapons in general are pretty good, just because it's really easy to get the benefits from it. I'm going to put it at the top of the B tier. Just getting 1D, it could even be like an A tier and just different weapon tier list. That's how crazy short swords are in comparison. But yeah, pretty fun weapon. Also, they're like one of the most common weapons in the game, so it's nice. But next we got ourselves the Render of Body and Mind, or Mind and Body. When the wielder attacks with advantage, they deal 1d8 of psychic damage. Now this is exactly why rarity does not matter whatsoever in Baldur's Gate 3. So the slicing short sword, bleeding, 2 slashing damage per turn. It's a timed one, and you can only get it to proc once per turn. With the Render of Body and Mind, every time you attack, you do an extra 1d8 of psychic damage. Again, being the best damage type in the game. That is a potential of 16 damage extra on your attack. That's crazy. So yeah, the Render of Body and Mind is way better than the Slicing Sword, just for obvious reasons that doing the burst damage right here, right now, with one of the best damage types in the game is really good. This is also a weapon you get from Lantarv, so kind of cool if you have a Shadow Blade with this weapon, because then both of them are going to have a really nice boost to their damage. It's a high A tier weapon. I don't think it's good enough to go into the S tier, but yeah, this is a really fun one and very powerful too for a variety of reasons. I guess just because the risky ring is just an easy to equip and just have complete advantage, or having a Shadow Blade, you're likely going to have advantage too. It's such a good sword. But next we got Fleshrender. Now this one is a little weird because it's so late in the game. You got to become an assassin of Baal, and they actually have so much better weapons at that point in the game. They'll give you your proficiency bonus as necrotic damage, and possibly stopping the target from receiving healing for 3 turns. That's cool, but yeah, that does require one of your short rests, and it's a constitution save, so you may not even apply it, whereas you can just use Bone Chill if you really wanted that effect. There's not many points in the game where you really need to stop the target from healing, so I would say it's an okay ability. However, it's the fact that we get this weapon so late in the game that I'm actually going to put this one a little bit lower on the tier list. just because of its availability. It's probably like a low B tier weapon, honestly, just because we get it so late. It is a good weapon, don't get me wrong. That ability is powerful. It's a +2 weapon enhancement, so that's nice. But we have so many other better great swords or short swords at this time that I just can't justify putting it higher. Now, I want to save the Crimson Mischief for a bit later in this video because it's the only legendary weapon here. Now, this weapon has a few different effects depending on if we have it in our main hand or in our offhand. So this will do a 1d6 of piercing damage. It'll deal an additional 1d4 piercing damage against targets with 50% of their health points or fewer. Now, a little note on this. That doesn't work in honor mode. So, yeah, you just don't get that extra damage, unfortunately. It's got a +2 weapon enhancement, so it's not even a +3, just a +2. It's got, when you have it in your main hand, this is... Honestly, if you're going to get both, if you're going to use both daggers from Orin, or both the short sword and dagger, this is best used in the main hand, because when it's in your main hand only, when you attack with advantage, you get an additional 7 piercing damage. So that is just plain good, because if you got the ballast armor, or if you got the Crimson Mischief in someone else's main hand, because it can apply the vulnerability to piercing damage, that 7 turns into 14. So you attack with advantage, you get 14 extra damage. You can put that on a fighter, a Eldritch Knight fighter. That's like a lot of extra damage right there. Pretty crazy, but it's also, if it's in your offhand, it can add your ability modifier to the damage of your attacks. And I want to note something. If this is in your offhand, it'll actually give the damage to your offhand crossbow too. So that's cool if you want to roll it with an offhand crossbow and still get the ability modifier on your weapon attacks, and you don't have any weapon fighting styles that will give that to you. So this is a good weapon. Obviously, it's a legendary, it's powerful, but I don't think it's that good in comparison to the others that we have here. It's obviously, you can tell it's going to go in the S tier, but Knife of the Undermountain King, in my opinion. Now, we're going to compare them. It's obviously not going to look the same on paper, but the thing is, with the Knife of the Undermountain King, you get this in Act 1. This can be a weapon you carry and use your entire build around. The Crimson Mischief, yeah, you get it late in Act 3. It's literally one of the last weapons you'll get. So while it is nice, this one's going to give you way more benefit over the longest, the run of Baldur's Gate 3. Because you get increased critical hit chances, which is fantastic. Also, re-rolling damage dies is nice, and getting advantage on attack rolls. Like, this is a really good weapon. This is a really good weapon too, and it's like, if you got these both at the very same time, Crimson Mischief is better, but it's just the fact that we can use the Undermountain King Knife for so long that, yeah, it's in the S tier. But we got 2 more weapons here. They're nothing super fantastic. The short sword +2. It's unfortunately just going to go in the C tier because we just have so many amazing weapons here as well that it's hard to put that any higher. And last, we got the Ambusher, which you get from the Dragonborn that's in Act 3. So you get a +1 initiative rolls. I always love any bonuses to initiative. That's great. Advantage on perception checks, great as well. In combat, you deal an additional 1d6 necrotic against creatures that haven't taken a turn yet. That's also fantastic. But it kind of falls into the trap of some of these other weapons where we get it so late in the game where it doesn't make that much of an impact. So I'd have to say this one is like a B tier item overall. It's good, but again, so late in the game that it's not going to make that much of an impact. And finally, we don't really get this item. I just wanted to include it here because it is considered a short sword. One of these weapons that you can get from the nurses. I guess you can't really get it, but it's one of the weapons that's classified as a short sword. I wanted to consider it here because it's one of the few. Like, there's only a few different appearances for short swords in Baldur's Gate 3. So, yeah, I just want to include it there. But let me know in the comments which of these short swords is your favorite. Shadowblade is the strongest weapon in the game. So yeah, short swords are much better than people probably think they are, and a lot of great ones, light finesse weapons that you can use on pretty much any build. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Hit the subscribe button below if you enjoyed, and I'll catch you all in the next video.